Good evening everyone, thank you for being there and welcome to episode 13 of my series of talks about the history of English detective fiction from 1920 to about 1960. Tonight I want to discuss the importance of book clubs to our genre, particularly in the 1950s. I was prompted to include this episode because what I think are important book clubs, in particular Foyles Thriller book club, are given such scant mention in the Oxford Companion to Crime Writing. But in trying to redress the balance, I've realised that it is such an important history that many of the subjects I'm going to mention really do merit a podcast to themselves. Because I'm talking about the major influences on English detective fiction, I'm focusing on the book clubs and their readerships in Britain. I've also resisted the temptation to discuss book clubs in a way that a collector would want to address them. However, the collector in me is very strong, so I shall probably allow myself to talk about it, but edit it out afterwards. I want to talk about how the book clubs affected, built and broadened the readership of detective fiction, and how that growth in turn influenced the writing. To understand the development of book clubs, we need to go back to 1900 and the Net Book Agreement. This was a restrictive agreement between publishers and retailers, which allowed publishers to determine the retail price and prohibit discounting. If any retailer stepped out of line, the agreement said, the publishers would cut off their supply. The declared motive was that it allowed publishers to subsidise less popular authors, so to begin with, it protected publishers. In later years, it was held to protect smaller retailers. The agreement, which was controversial throughout its life, was judged to be unlawful in 1994. There was one very obvious way around the agreement. It allowed retailers to discount damaged stock. So some punched holes in the corner of covers, while others spoilt them with a strike of a marker pen against the page edges. I'm sure that some examples were simply marked damaged inside. I have some books discounted in this way that are as close to fine condition as any buyer could hope for. But there was a need for a more legitimate way around the agreement, and this involved the cooperation of the publishers. Book clubs were designed to bring out different editions of the books, offered not to the general public, but to subscribers, who were, in effect, the general public in any case. Now, the collector in me does want to spend just a few minutes on that word edition. The purist will say that impressions of one edition are those printed from the same plates. In most cases, this was how book club issues were produced, with different title pages inserted. This is why early book club editions, in effect often the second impression of the first edition, remain of interest. But let's get back on course. The history of book clubs really begins with Alan Bott, a journalist with an impressive war history. He was awarded the Military Cross and Bar. He had been the editor of the Daily Graphic in the 1930s and went on to found Pan Paperbacks in 1944 and the Folio Society in 1947. In 1937, Bott started the Readers' Union book club, focusing on established books by quality authors, and also the Reprint Society, branded as World Books, in 1939. Foyles, the bookshop in Charing Cross Road, had already started its own book club. But while these clubs did include many detective titles, they were not devoted solely to mystery novels. It was in the 1940s that Foyles developed genre lists from their existing book club, bringing out 6 different clubs, including the hugely successful Thriller book club. The Thriller Book Club editions have the same page layout as trade editions, but were made on cheaper paper and, importantly, had different dust jackets. Close behind the Thriller Book Club came the Mystery Guild. Now, with the perspective of 60 years, it is possible to argue that the Mystery Guild list was superior to the Thriller Book Club's. I'm sure that it is. But the Mystery Guild books did not, at first sight, look so impressive. They were slightly smaller, trimmed, and thinner. Their dust jackets were frail, almost see-through in some cases, and they opted for generic brand designs. The colours, the titles, and the authors changed, but the motifs and the layout stayed the same. They didn't go in for jackets that illustrated the story until much later, when the club was past its best. It was the Thriller Book Club and the Mystery Guild Book Club that most influenced the genre. However, I need to acknowledge the companion and popular book clubs, both from Oddham's, who did include important detective writers in their lists, and of course the Readers' Union, and especially the Reprint Society. None of these general book clubs could match the Thriller Book Club for artwork. Most editions from these other lists repeated generic designs. So what was the importance of these book clubs for detective fiction? Firstly, subscribers had either no choice or a restricted choice on the titles that they received. So the book clubs introduced many writers to readers who may not otherwise have taken their books from the shelves. This is an important difference between the book club and the effective libraries. No doubt some of these new readers further explored the author's work. In a previous podcast, we've considered that most books were borrowed rather than purchased between the wars. Now, book clubs made it possible to buy and keep on a modest budget, so they became, for the first time, something of value in an ordinary household. For the first time, collecting books was no longer a pastime for the well-off or the expert. With a book club, readers could assemble and be proud of a series of volumes. And so, readers' expectations through the 50s expanded. They were more discriminating and wanted to explore new boundaries. Now, I need to say that alongside the book clubs, publishers were already developing innovative ways of presenting paperbacks to the public. So many of the benefits of book clubs went hand in hand with the benefits drawn from the paperback market. By the end of the 1950s, as paperback books developed beyond their initial readership and way beyond their initial niche, the book clubs found it more difficult to identify their place in the market. They persevered but lost their distinctiveness and became nothing more than cheap and less desirable versions of the trade edition. But during their heyday of 10 to 15 years, the book clubs had strengthened the readership for detective fiction. Now it is fun to look back on these editions, and they were great fun. However, some of the titles are viewed as being particularly desirable to collectors. The Thriller Book Club edition of From Russia with Love by Ian Fleming was printed prior to the trade editions, so strictly speaking, that is the first. Mystery Guild copies of Harry Patterson's books recently went through a fashion of being very collectible. And the book club edition of Agatha Christie's Dumb Witness is illustrated, where the trade edition is not. And furthermore, Agatha Christie plays the role of the body in one picture. There are many other examples. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to episode 13 in my series of talks on the history of English detective fiction. My name is Malcolm Noble. My website is malcolmnoble.com. I hope you'll take a look at it. The podcast page on that website includes a list of previous episodes with links if you wish to catch up. I need to thank Freeze Effects for the royalty-free music. I posted this podcast on the 14th of April and will upload the next episode on the 28th of April. I hope that you'll be there to listen. In the meantime, all that remains is for me to wish you good night and God bless.